Today, I'd like to talk to you about another serious matter. The topic relates to youth indoctrination by government, which is a characteristic of virtually all despotic regimes worldwide. But first, I will start off by talking about the piece of legislation that allows for military involvement in K-12 education. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the latest version of the National Defense Authorization Act, which I like to call the National Detention Authorization Act, effectively allows the government to suspend habeas corpus for select Americans that it deems to be involved in terrorism based on nothing more than an allegation. As long as the authorization for the use of military force is in effect, then people labeled as terrorists by the U.S. government may not be afforded due process and can be whisked off to a detention camp without a trial or any burden of proof on the government regarding the merit of the charges against those accused. The powers that be have made it clear to us that the authorization for the use of military force will last well out into the future because we are fighting yet another asinine war on some vague concept without any clear-cut definition for victory or defeat, similar to the highly destructive and corrosive war on drugs. This time we are fighting a costly war on terror. The NDAA runs counter to the core values of what was once a very prestigious judicial system in the United States, and it provides a rather convenient tool for despotic powers to abuse. For example, they might use it in an effort to retain power that may be slipping away from them because of outspoken dissidents that choose to exercise their First Amendment right to demonstrate the incompetence of the government and embarrass it with the truth. It is no accident that this is being implemented at a time when our society is in decay and the current powers, the ones who led us down this path in the first place, are afraid of losing the stranglehold that they have had on the American people, despite the fact that their waning power is simply the result of their own greed and ill-conceived policies driven by personal ego as opposed to the love that they should have had for this country and its Constitution. The version of the NDAA that was recently passed has declared war on another concept. In essence, it declares war on ideas. However, despite the language in the bill regarding Islamic jihadists, it goes well beyond the ideology of radical imams. I think the true purpose is to chill the speech of Americans through the implied threat that the government now has the power to disappear its citizens, especially those with dangerous ideas that challenge the current status quo, which is precisely what free speech is intended to accomplish. The passage of this is nothing more than a terror tactic that is meant to scare the American public into sitting down and shutting up while what's left of their great nation can be worked over and cannibalized by the squawking vultures of the two competing parties. That's what we've become. Our national symbolism has gone from the power and prestige of a majestic eagle in flight to a bunch of scavengers hopping around chaotically, tearing rotting meat out of each other's mouths to secure their own benefit, while others starve for the freedom promised by our Constitution. What they didn't tell you about the NDAA is that in earlier fiscal years, troubling signs of a military junta were bubbling up through the provisions that were being added to it each year. One such provision involves the DoD gaining access to school children in the K-12 education system, something that should have concerned people long ago, especially educators and the parents of children who were asked to send them away for a DoD-sponsored education during normal school hours and with the cooperation of many local school districts across the nation. Do you remember back to Obama's first year in office, when he asked our nation to speak directly to the school children? Many schools complied by rolling out the television sets so that he could address the collective consciousness of the children at that time. That smacked of the same kind of indoctrination found in totalitarian regimes throughout history and around the world today. So I said no, and I refused to allow my child to participate. Well, the DoD apparently also wants to indoctrinate your children. They have set up what is called the Starbase program, and have convinced schools to relinquish an extraordinary amount of time devoted to their education for DoD-sponsored training. Because of the history regarding military involvement in child education, I said no to this program as well. In an effort to help parents that are faced with the prospect of sending their kindergarteners, grade schoolers, and teenagers off to military bases on school time, I'm going to share the letter I wrote to my child's teacher regarding the matter when my child's school sent home a permission slip regarding this week-long event. Perhaps other parents will have it in them to just say no to this and help fight against the nonsensical ideological war that is being waged for the hearts and minds of our nation's children today. Dear Educator, recently, several forms came home with my child that contained agreements with express consent and hold harmless provisions that effectively absolves the state, the United States government, the National Guard, and the Department of Defense of liability relating to activities of students and parent volunteers, except as may be allowed under my state's Tort Claims Act and/or the Federal Tort Claims Act. These provisions were part of standard form agreements relating to the DoD's Starbase program. Of course, such a broad waiver of so many governmental entities raised questions in the mind of this concerned parent, so I decided to investigate further. The program's mission statement is to raise interest and improve the knowledge and skills of at-risk youth in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which will provide for a highly educated and skilled American workforce that can meet the advanced technological requirements of the Department of Defense. At first glance, one could hardly argue against such lofty and admirable goals. Who doesn't want one's own child to improve upon his or her knowledge and skill sets in such important subjects? Who doesn't want the Department of Defense to remain technologically capable in an increasingly hostile world? I do not underestimate the need to increase the quality of education in these important areas, nor do I wish for the United States to fall behind its enemies in any arena. However, several important questions remain. Why is this need being fulfilled by a 5-day course created and directed by the Department of Defense? More important is the question of how it's done. Why would a government that is facing such serious budgetary constraints see fit to expand the program nationwide and make it permanent with a continuous source of funding? Is education at the K-12 level the proper role of the Department of Defense? I think not. Despite any stated purpose, I am deeply concerned by any intrusion of federal militaristic components of the government into areas of primary education, a function traditionally reserved to state and local governments. Frequently, legislation results in unintended consequences, and some legislation is passed with a pre-existing incongruity between its stated and actual intended purposes. When it comes to such an important matter, it would be unwise to proceed under the assumption that neither of these problems are manifest. 10 U.S.C. Section 2193B, Subpart A, vests the authority to create this program in the Secretary of Defense in coordination with the Secretaries of the military departments, while Section 2193B, Subparts D and E require the Secretary to prescribe standards and procedures for selection of persons for participation in the program and regulations concerning the conduct of the program, respectively. To me, it seems strange to grant this kind of authority to the Secretary of Defense. This is neither a simple case of military recruitment on high school and college campuses, nor is it a one-day on-site field trip. This is distinguishable from those instances, for here the Secretary of Defense becomes responsible for methodology that allows members of the military branches, and presumably intelligence agencies, to step in and become educators for 5 whole days out of an entire 186-day school year. Although this 2.7% total out-of-school military education may seem nominal to some people, for me it's a slippery slope that I am unwilling to allow my child's education to embark upon. Therefore, because of my fundamental disagreements regarding the wisdom of creating such a program, the dangers that I think it represents to the traditional educational role of state and local governments, its potential for other unforeseen dangers, and my unwillingness to assume the risk for my child's involvement in such activities and their related dangers, my child will not be participating in the Department of Defense's Starbase program. Sincerely, concerned parent.